Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Got a new Cardfight Vanguard video for you guys today. So today we are doing a tier list on the Destined Ones. So for context, real quick, we actually did this tier list yesterday on stream. I'm kind of a dummy and I didn't realize that the chat box for the Twitch stream covered almost the entirety of the tier list. So we're going to redo it from scratch. I remember my where I put most things and the opinions of myself in the chat. I'm gonna tell you guys what I think about each of the decks and why I'm putting them in the position I'm putting them in. We're going to be doing two different versions of the tier list on this video. We're going to be doing each card in a vacuum individually, and then we're going to talk about the decks with their support. All right. So if you guys enjoy this kind of content and want to see more tier lists, let me know down in the comments. Drop a like on the video. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you guys want more Cardfight Vanguard content. But enough from me. Let's jump in and get started. So as you guys see, we don't just have the six Destined Ones here. We also have Varga, because Varga is going to be our benchmark. Varga is a damn near perfect deck by itself with its skill and its divine skill, as well as its deck as a whole. This is going to be what we're going to base the positions off of everything else off of. We're going to go in order of the release of these cards, and we're going to talk about each one as we go. So starting up is my favorite of the Destined Ones, Destined One of Infinity, Levi-Trust. And I believe in a vacuum that this card is A tier. So it basically has what, 4 skills built in, masked behind 2. For anybody that doesn't remember what Levi-Trust does, Counterblast 1, you give one of your rearguard circles and one of your opponent's rearguard circles an Infinity Eyes marker. Infinity Eyes markers can be used to increase the attack or boost of a card by 10,000 or reduce it by 10,000. But if you reduce one of your opponent's cards, you get to draw a card and then you remove the Infinity Eyes marker. Absolute solid effect, good offense, good defense. The more Infinity Eyes markers you get, the stronger you become, or the more you can nerf your opponent. Now, while you can stack the Infinity Eyes markers on circles, you cannot give more than a 10k boost or a 10k reduction. But it works really well against multi-attack because you can give each multi-attack on a certain circle -10 and draw cards off of it. It can actually make the late game of this card really, really strong when your opponent thinks they can go off and you're just like, nah, I'm nerfing you. And of course, the divine skill is a Soul Blast 1 to give yourself an additional Infinity Eyes marker, give your opponent an additional Infinity Eyes marker, gain 10k +1 critical. So on divine skill turn, you can give your units basically plus 20k power while being able to make sure you can defend against your opponent by giving 2 of their circles -10 each. You get an extra critical, so your opponent pretty much has to guard. And because the restriction of it is you and your opponent being at grade 3, this guy is also good going second. Again, that's just him in a vacuum. We'll talk about his support when we get to the second half of the tier list. Up second, we have Scales. Now, by itself, without its support, I would say Scales as a card is B tier. So Scales just doesn't do much. A Soul Blast 2 to give 3 units 5k is nothing. And then even his divine skill, the Counterblast 1 to give 2 more units 5k, deal your opponent a damage. It's cool that it reduces the power game from triggers from this damage by 10k, but they still get all their trigger effects. Over triggers still shut your turn down. Like, it's just giving 5 units 5k is just the fact that that's the maximum what this card does. Like, sure, on its first skill, if you give 2 overcharge units plus 5k, let's say you give the whole thing, you give 3 units 5k, he gets 10k and draws a card, as opposed to what every other card on this list does, or every other divine skill card, like all the faded ones. Like, this guy is mid at best. Don't worry, when we talk about his deck, his position does change, but him in a vacuum is just so lackluster, and I had really high hopes for Equilibra. Now, Alden. Mind you, when I say this, I am not a Keter Sanctuary stan. Ketter's okay, it is just not my cup of tea. But Alden, in my opinion, is an S tier. Besides the fact that Alden is extremely flexible and can go in any Keter deck, just what he has built into himself, he has an extra attack every single turn. His divine skill can either be used to build a board, to reuse on-play skills. Because of his condition that he has built in, wherever you call over one of your rear guards with his skill, you get to bounce it back. It lets you it facilitates an early game, because then you can call over the units that you use in your early game to bounce them back, to reuse them, to rearrange your setup. It gets so much advantage. It gets you an automatic extra attack every turn without having to need any other rear guards, which is a huge deal to me, because you guys know I prefer Vanguard-centric decks. Like, obviously every deck has its support that's supposed to help it, but he can do things on his own, whereas opposed to just about every other one of the Destined Ones cannot. Like CFL, sure, she can get triple drive and extra attack. Odium can do the same thing after a certain amount of time, but he is just boom, every attack, boom, extra attack, boom, extra attack. He's a little bit tougher to use, does take some thinking, but overall, absolute solid card. Oh, and the stopping your stuff from being retired is insanely good. The CFL. I'm trying not to be biased with La CFL because I've had very many bad experiences with her. In a vacuum, she gets triple drive every turn and has one potential restand. The defense, the extra 5k and crit is cute, but against a lot of decks that are out now, it's just not enough. As someone who used to play Griffo Gila religiously, so I understand an 18k base Vanguard is helpful. It's just, I'm gonna say it's a little bit better than Equilibra in a vacuum. No. I guess in a vacuum, being able to get triple drive every turn and then having a restand skill that also gets you a defense buff. I guess an offense buff too, because you get a critical for the rest of the game. But it's dragged down by the cost of having to send at least 2 rear guards to Soul. Now I know that Lyrical can get a lot of pluses, but we're talking about the card in a vacuum. The way I look at it is, worst case scenario, if you can't make a board, she's a vanilla. And that is not good. Absolutely not good. So it's kind of, you gotta take it in the middle. Highball, you know, she gets triple drive, gets an extra attack, she gets 4 drive checks on her divine skill turn. But on a low ball, she is literally a vanilla. So that sounds very middle of the pack for me. On the brights, like even Equilibra, he needs rear guards to call to be able to give the 5k out, to be able to get his 10k. So yeah, she can operate a little bit better by herself than he can, because at least she can still get a restand. So that's my thing. Because if you look at the rest of the list, like Levidras, even if you have nothing to call, even if it's just the card, you're potentially pumping up. Even triggers can get 10k, but you're still nerfing your opponent for their turn, so you're still doing something. Same with Alden can just spit out a board. All right, BL Odium. Wait, no, she's last. I forgot about Impaldio. I hate this card. I think this is the worst one of the Destined Ones, the worst divine skill out of all of them in the game. It's just not a good card, and the mechanic behind it is just cheeks. Having to take damage to turn your effects on is just not good. The game right now as a whole is so aggressive that the way Impaldio works is so counterproductive. Normally you would want to defend a little bit in the early game, and you would think getting the plus 5k would help. But a lot of times numbers they're just going to push through to keep on dealing you damage. And if you don't have the cards in the discard to get your auto mod gauges, you're giving them a bunch of free damage, which is bad, because then that means you can't take the damage later and actually depend on that extra defense. Like if you get rushed, if you went, let's say you went first, cool. Your opponent can attack you on grade 1, not attack you on grade 2, and now grade 3, your deck just doesn't work. And I do not like the fact that that is the case. Like its skill is cool. Check to Counterblast 1, get an auto mod gauge, check top 5, call a dude. Front row gains 5k for every 2 auto mod gauges. Fine. That's good. Divine Skill to get the quad drive. That's also good. But it just feels like worse Bob Sagra. Like Bob Sagra needs the arms to go off, fine, but having to actually get punched in the face to work and mid-max so that you don't take too much damage, but you take enough to get your skills to work, like it's just not a good mechanic. And when we talk about their support, you'll understand why I have even more problems with this card. In a vacuum, the card is okay. Being able to get quad drive, being able to call a dude every turn, being able to pump up. It just, within Palsio, you have to actually take his mechanic into account because the deck revolves around the auto mod gauges. And I think it's better by itself without the restriction of the auto mod gauges, but the auto mod gauges bring it down. So I say in a vacuum, C tier. Liel, this one's gonna get me some hate. Liel Odium, no, I'm not saying she's D tier. That was a misclick. But she is going right here. Liel has a similar problem to Impaldio, where she is ridiculously strong on her divine skill turn. But RNG can absolutely screw you. Now, Liel being able to put a card from your field or hand into the Regro's case to get triple drive, cool. Them putting the restriction of calling it triple drive makes it so, you know, it has a defensive option against it, so that kind of hurts it a little bit. The need for Distorted Bane means that this card in a vacuum is infinitely worse, because if you don't see 2 copies of Distorted Bane, you will not see your divine skill till turn 6 or later, and that's bad. The divine skill is really, really strong, basically giving you 6 attacks and drawing you, getting you 5 drive checks and an extra draw. Absolutely solid. But the fact that it takes such a hard setup means that even at your best, you're not getting it till turn 4, and at a worst, turn 6. And it definitely, the fact that it were like hyper needs a support card as opposed to being able to do things on its own drags the card down for me. Its divine skill lifts it up, but the restrictions on the card bring it down. Alden doesn't, another big thing I forgot to mention about Alden and why it also is an S tier is its divine skill. Out of all of the Destined Ones, it's the only one that doesn't have a restriction. You can use it going first, you can use it going second, you can use it if your opponent's at grade 2, if your opponent's at grade 3, it doesn't matter, you can use it whenever you want. And that facilitates your early game and combos that you could potentially do. The rest of these all require your opponent to be at least at grade 3. And that means you can use them all going second, but Liel Odium is, no matter what, you have to wait till minimum return for. So this is my tier list for these cards in a vacuum. We're going to reset, and we're going to do these cards with their support, and I'm going to explain to you guys why I think the tier list does change some. All right, guys, so we're all reset. We're back to talking about these cards, but this time we're talking about them with their support. As you see, we still have Varga as an S tier deck. Varga, especially now after getting its more recent support, has Superior Call, it has Guard Restrict. Being able to stop your opponent from intercepting and then just wiping that board with Varga's skill is so annoying. All the dropout, like the Varga deck is damn near perfect. The only thing that deck needs is a counter charge, and I pray it never gets it because that would make the deck way too strong. It's already got Radiant's Caliber, and that's already annoying as shit. Again, we're going to go in order of release, and we're going to talk about everything. So first off is Levy Dress. I think Levy Dress still stays in A tier. Again, we've talked about Levy Dress in a vacuum and how its skills work. Its support is ridiculously strong. Foxel, being able to give you a back row attack so you can get an extra attack every turn for a counter blast 1, pretty cheap. They have their own counter charge, soul charge. Anatogaster is absolutely the best support card in the deck. Being able to check top 2, get a +1 by adding 1 to hand, and being able to stack the last card on top of the bottom of the deck. Once I found out you can put it on top of the deck, that card shot up for me. Because do you know how many times I've stacked triggers with it? And he gives himself his own power boost, and he can attack from the back row. Granted, it's not until you have at least 3 Infinity Eyes markers on the field, So if you went second and you used your divine skill, you can get it on turn 3. Otherwise, you have to wait till turn 4 to get his back row attack. So it's like, it can be way better or really good. Regardless, Anatogaster is good. Hooli is okay. It's a counterblast one to get a dude from the drop. It is a big beat stick once you have 3 Infinity Eyes markers, but that's probably the card I like the least out of his support. I forget anything. That's pretty much it. The rest of the deck can be pretty freeform, which does help the deck as well, because you can play cards that facilitate your early game. You can play more defensive options with all the blitz orders in Stoatia. Like Stoatia has some really good rear guards. The only downside to Levidras himself is that he's a little bit weaker on hand advantage, because they're trying to balance out the fact that you can draw cards during your opponent's turn. The build that I play now, I use cards like Rancor Chain to be able to get a +1 in the early game, and then I still like the grade 2 for their Levidras's ride line because it gets you a top 5 search. And there's other cards you can play for superior calls to be able to build a board so you don't have to use your hand. So there's ways to build a deck to make up for its weaknesses, and which is why I really like it as an A tier deck. The only thing that's stopping it from getting into S tier is because there's still just better decks out there. For example, you guys saw me put this in B tier. I'm putting Equilibra with its support as an S tier deck. As a matter of fact, I think it is the best of the Destined One decks. The deck does everything. Minus, it doesn't have Retire, which is my only problem with the deck, because I was expecting a Retire based deck, considering that, you know, it's a Dragon Empire deck. And seeing what Varga Dragras did, restanding and retiring the front row, I was hoping for something more like that. Playstyle wise, it's extremely simple. You pump up your rear guards. Because you pump them up, they pump up themselves, or they get special effects. It honestly feels like you're playing dimensional robos, like old dimensional robos, where it used to be like, cool, give this power, cool, now it gains more power and stacking power. The deck has draw power, it has early game aggression, like just with its base support, not even with text that you put in. Its ride line calls out a grade 1. They have a grade 1 that's a counterblast to soul charge and draw. You could call that just and use it as early as turn 1. They have multi-attack grade 2s. They have the grade 3 that pumps itself up and then draws cards. Like, it is such an aggressive, easy to use deck. And because it's so easy to use, it is the best one. Like, because of the divine skill, dealing a damage, you can push for game with their opponent at turn 3, 3 damage, almost with no effort whatsoever. It can get 5 attacks with 2 of the grade 2. It has the order to call back from the drop. Like, it does everything, and it does it so easy. It's even got its own counter charger and its own way to build soul. So it's like, even with, there's still space for other techs, like Shenri's great in the deck, but you don't need it. And that's why it's definitely an S tier deck. Alden is still S tier, and it's good. Like, at a maximum, it's definitely better than Equilibra. The reason I'm putting it behind Equilibra is because of the difficulty of the deck. Hear me out. The Caterpile is amazing. You know, Salgaons, Tethfalts, the order to draw 2 cards. They're like, Alden is so free form and can be played with anything. But behind its own support, it also has Razeonel for more draw power. It has Ermac for bigger numbers. It has its grade 0 that can get you 5 attacks with your opponent at grade 2. Like, it's got everything. But the deck takes so much brain power sometimes. You have to make sure you call in the right order. You have to make sure that you call over the right cards so you can get your cards back and make most use of them. You have to think about what order you're going to attack in so you can call the right cards over the right cards. Like, the only reason I say Equilibra is a higher than Alden is that Equilibra is so brain dead easy to use, whereas Alden, the skill floor for it is a lot higher. The ceiling is also a lot higher, and like what you can do with the deck is definitely better, but the amount of planning you have to do to really maximize on Alden makes it a little bit tougher to use than Equilibra, and that's the only reason it's behind it. They're both S tier decks, but Alden's just a little bit behind. The CFL, with all her support, unfortunately, CFL's support, her like main support, is just cheeks. Her Restander and her Countercharger are the only cards that are worth a damn. But Lyrical has great overall generic support. I'm still messing with the deck. I'm still trying to get it where I really like it. And when it works, it really works. It's just a lot of times it doesn't. I've tried cards like Striga to get to, you know, build a board because you have to be able to put 2 rear guards into the soul, but that requires the use of orders. Her orders not great because it doesn't really do anything and it would cost a counterblast. It's just Lyrical's best support is always locked behind certain decks, and a lot of the generic support is good, but it's just not good enough to make up for how not great this card actually is. So I'm gonna put this here in B tier. I think I put it in a different spot last time when we did this live on Twitch and YouTube last night, but having messed with the deck some more, because I messed with the deck more on stream after, and we started to make some progress, so I'm gonna put it up a little bit higher. But I still think its divine skill is not, its divine skill and its main skill are not that great. Being having to put 2 or more rear guards to soul to get her effect off means that you still have to call out more cards, because she draws cards with her support, but she doesn't make boards. That's why we try to make up for that weakness with cards like Call and Response, Striga, other draw cards. And it's just, sometimes it just doesn't feel like enough, and then it feels like you're lacking in the offense, considering you have to attack with your rear guards first. So it's like, that's because her grade 2 resander requires that you have nothing standing in your front row, and then you want to be able to use those rear guards to be able to use her skill. So it's just like you're minusing yourself. You have to attack weird. Sometimes you don't have something to give the triggers to. Like, it's sometimes you want to be able to split up triggers, and no, instead you have to stack them all on 1 attack. And she basically locked to 4 attacks on a normal turn, 5 attacks on a divine skill turn, and that's all she has. She has no flexibility to change up the way you do it either. So it's just, it's predictable, it's weird. It's just, I have my problems with CFL. Empoleon, I actually think Empoleon's generic support makes him worse. I think it goes into D tier when you combine it with its whole deck, because the deck does not play to the playstyle of the deck. All of Empoleon's cards either gain power boosts or gain drive checks. Even with the new cards that got announced yesterday, they have a card that calls off the top of the deck, and then a bunch of cards that give power boosts. Nothing else. The deck already hits numbers because of Empoleon's skill and because their rear guards pump themselves up, but they have nothing to facilitate the actual gameplay of getting your auto mod gauges. So it keeps the same problem the deck has, where you have to eat damage to be able to do stuff. And then eating the damage only helps so much because the numbers are so ridiculous in this game. Like if Empoleon goes against Equilibra, Empoleon's getting folded, because that extra defense ain't gonna mean shit to Equilibra at all. And that's a problem, because the whole point was for the deck to be defensive, to punish your opponent for dealing you the damage, but it just ends up folding because of it. All I think the deck needed was 1 card that can help you get an auto mod gauge without having to depend on either taking damage or the skill of your grade 3. If the deck got that, it would be infinitely better, because that would be a 4 of, and with all the draw power and search power of the deck, it would actually be able to, you know, reliably get to their 4 and 5 and 6 auto mod gauges without having to eat a shitload of damage. Like, you have to take 2 damage in the early game to be able to, on turn 3, get to 4 gauge. You can't even use your Radline grade 2 skill, which is supposed to put a card into the top card of your deck into the auto mod gauge, and then you're supposed to be able to add an auto mod back. So you should be getting a +1, but you can't do it because it ends up hurting you every time you do it. It's frustrating that that's the way they built the deck. And that's how they decided to give it a weakness, even though it's limited to a 3 attack deck. Sure, you get a bunch of drive checks, but those drive checks aren't going to kill your opponent if you're only doing 3 attacks and nothing else. Like, it's cool because the deck filters a lot, so you have a higher chance of hitting like your over trigger or multiple triggers, but multi-attack is usually what wins the game in Vanguard right now. They don't even have a guard restrict. And then Odium. Lastly is Liel Odium. This one is kind of a toss-up. I would say either low A or high B for this one. So Liel as a whole Still suffers from the problems I said when we were talking about her in a vacuum, where she's dependent on Distorted Bane to really be able to function. But Dark States has good support for getting you to your orders. Of course, every nation has the grade 1 that searches orders, so it's a lot. You can basically play 8 copies of Distorted Bane. It has good, decent resource recovery. The deck doesn't counterblast a whole lot, so it's like, though Dark States has no counter charge, it doesn't really hurt you that much. They have cards that Superior Call. They have their own version of Teth Fault, so you're gonna play Distorted Bane, and then you can use that to then call out a board. There's cards that let you filter into the cards in and out of the soul. The deck does have a problem with deck out, because the Dark State supports soul charges and draws a decent amount, and Superior Call, so it's like you have the plus engine to live and to make boards and to push, but you have to do it fast. And if you have, especially if you miss Distorted Bane even one turn and have to wait till turn 5 to get your Divine Skill off, it pretty much fucks you for deck out. If your opponent survives, you're gonna lose. That being said, cards like Clockwise Dragon are actually really good for Liel Odium. Her deck doesn't Energy Blast too hard unless you go hard into like Anachronous Dragon. Even then, that's only an Energy Blast 2. Whereas Clockwise basically says when you discard a card, you can add it back, so you can get back cards that you discard for your rides. When you discard for her Divine Skill, you can get those 2 cards back. Like, it helps a lot with managing some of the discard costs. If you discard for the grade 1 to search Distorted Bane, you can get back the card you discarded. So I really want to mess around with that card a little bit more in that deck. And you can limit how much you're drawing out of the deck by getting rid of cards like Energy Blast Cyclers, while still being able to maintain advantage by getting the cards back that you're discarding. So it almost makes up for it without having to draw off the deck. So I think there's definitely some sauce that can be made with Liel Odium, as opposed to decks like Lysiophale and Impultio. But that is it for me, guys. This is the tier list. This is how I feel about the power level of the Destined Ones. We're supposed to get another Destined One with what's going on in the anime. And once we do, we'll plug that into the tier list as well. So keep an eye out for that. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and let me know how you guys feel about the strengths and weaknesses of the deck. Maybe I'm capping, maybe I'm crazy, maybe my opinion's wrong, but I would love to hear your guys' opinions. If you guys want to check me out on social media, those links will be down below. If you guys want to see me live playing some Vanguard, it'll either be right here on YouTube or twitch.tv/Zapikel, usually on Tuesdays. Times might be changing, so bear with me and keep an eye out for that. I usually make announcements on my Twitter or on YouTube. Again, my name is the same on everything, so you can always find me. That is it from me. I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.